He lifted his glass with an easy smile, the kind men wear when they've never been forced to answer for their sins. His voice carried across the glittering hall, smooth and confident, polished by years of power. "To Alina," he said, pausing just long enough to let the room lean in. "May she finally experience what it means to grow up in a stable family, something her sister could never provide." Laughter followed, light, careless, obedient. I didn't join them. My hands stayed still, resting in my lap, but inside me something ancient and heavy shifted. My name is Maurice Calder, and the man mocking me in front of nearly 200 guests had built his fortune on the bones of my parents. For 20 years, I carried the truth like a buried fault line. Tonight, the pressure finally reached the surface. The ballroom shimmered under glass and crystal, reflecting snow-covered mountains beyond the windows. Everything was beautiful in the way wealth always is, expensive, clean, and completely detached from consequence. My younger sister sat at the center of it all, wrapped in white silk and fragile hope. Alina smiled for the cameras, but I saw the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers trembled when she thought no one was watching. At the head table stood Victor Hale, her future father-in-law, a man who spoke about family while quietly destroying others. When he talked about stability, something twisted in my chest. Stability was the word they used when the mine collapsed too, a word that sounded solid until the ground disappeared beneath your feet. I stood, the scrape of my chair against marble cut through the laughter like a crack forming in glass. "Mr. Hale," I said calmly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Do you know what real stability costs?" The room fell silent. Victor turned slowly, his smile tightening just enough to reveal irritation before smoothing itself back into place. "Ah," he said lightly, "the older sister finally speaks." I didn't answer him. I looked at Alina instead. Her eyes were wide, searching my face for answers she wasn't ready to hear. I sat back down. Victor thought this was about embarrassment. He was wrong. This was about exposure. A phone buzzed nearby. Victor glanced down, and for the first time that night, the color drained from his face. A notification glowed on the screen, an investigation reopened, files resurfacing, a past he thought was buried clawing its way back into the light. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The night the ground collapsed still lived inside me, sharp and unrelenting. I was 16, gripping a frozen fence while sirens screamed into the dark. Dust filled the air. Men shouted that the supports had failed. They told us no one was left inside. They were wrong. My parents never came home. The next morning, newspapers printed a cleaner version of the truth, an unavoidable accident, a natural shift. I walked into Hale Industries with that headline folded in my pocket and watched a man dismiss my grief without even looking up. That was the day I stopped believing in accidents. Years passed in steel and silence. I studied structures by day and raised my sister by night. Alina learned how to dream. I learned how buildings fail, and why. When Victor Hale re-entered our lives, I already knew how his world would end. Alina didn't. She told me about the proposal with excitement in her voice, unaware she was marrying into the family that had stolen everything from us. I watched her step into their world of glass walls and quiet cruelty, and I stayed silent long enough to be sure. Long enough to be precise. I followed patterns others ignored. Old permits, new shortcuts, familiar signatures. When I found proof that Victor was doing it again, cutting corners, risking lives for profit, I didn't hesitate. I sent everything to people who knew what truth was worth. Alina called me crying, accusing me of trying to destroy her future. I told her I was rebuilding what had been broken. She hung up. Justice always costs something. By the time the wedding day arrived, everything was already in motion. The files were scheduled. The authorities were watching. When Victor raised his glass again earlier than planned, I stood before fear could stop me. "You talk about foundations," I said clearly. "But do you know what keeps the ground from collapsing?" Laughter faltered. Screens flickered. Documents filled the room, transfers, forged approvals, signatures he couldn't erase. His son shouted. Alina cried. Victor said nothing. Power looks very small when truth finally arrives. Later that night, rain traced silver lines down my window as the news repeated his arrest again and again. I placed my father's old drafting pencil on the table and whispered that they finally saw what he saw. A year later, grass covered the old site where the mine had swallowed lives. A memorial stood where rubble once ruled. They called it revenge, but revenge is loud. This was quieter. This was restoration. I etched a single line in